She didn't scream. She didn't throw anything. She didn't even cry. Emily Carter simply stood in the middle of the living room, barefoot on cold marble tile, listening to the sound of another woman's laughter echoing from her husband's phone. The apartment overlooked the Manhattan skyline, floor-to-ceiling windows glowing with city lights. It was the kind of place people dreamed about. Designer furniture, a quiet hum from the HVAC system, the faint smell of expensive coffee still lingering in the air. Everything looked perfect. Everything felt dead. Ryan Blake's phone vibrated again on the kitchen counter. Emily didn't rush to it. She already knew. She had known for months, long before the late nights, the sudden business trips, the way he stopped asking how her day was. The notification lit up the screen just enough for her to see the name. Madison. No last name needed. Emily picked up the phone, not with anger, but with a strange calm that scared her more than rage ever could. One photo. That was all it took. A mirror selfie in a hotel bathroom, Madison's hand on Ryan's chest, his watch visible in the frame. The same watch Emily had given him after his first big funding round. She set the phone back down exactly where it was. Ryan wasn't home. He had said he'd be late. A board dinner, investors, always investors. Emily walked into the bedroom. She opened the closet and pulled out a single carry-on suitcase. Not the big luggage, not dramatic, just enough for someone who wasn't planning to explain herself. She folded slowly. One sweater, one pair of jeans, toiletries, her passport, her laptop. She skipped jewelry, skipped makeup, skipped anything that tied her to this place. On the nightstand sat her wedding ring. She picked it up, feeling its familiar weight, remembering the way Ryan's hands had shaken when he slipped it onto her finger years ago, back when they shared a one-bedroom apartment and ate takeout on the floor while dreaming about the future. Emily placed the ring on the marble counter in the kitchen. No note, no goodbye, no explanation. She took one last look around the apartment, not with sadness, but with clarity. This wasn't her home anymore. It was just a stage she had outgrown. The elevator ride down was silent. Her reflection stared back at her from the mirrored walls. She looked calm, too calm, like someone who had already made peace with something irreversible. When the elevator doors opened, cool night air rushed in. That was when she saw it. A black limousine idled at the curb, its engine humming softly, headlights cutting through the darkness. The driver stood outside, perfectly still, suit crisp, door already open. Emily hesitated for half a second. She hadn't ordered a car. The driver met her eyes and spoke gently, as if he'd been waiting all along. "Ms. Carter?" Her heart skipped. "Yes," she said. "Your ride is ready." Emily didn't ask who sent it. She didn't look back at the building. She didn't take out her phone. She stepped into the limousine, the door closing behind her with a quiet, final click. And in that moment, without a single word, Emily Carter disappeared from the life that thought it had broken her. Emily Carter had not always been silent. There was a time when her voice filled small rooms and unfinished offices, when her opinions mattered before success made everything louder and colder. Back then, she and Ryan Blake were just two people with a shared dream and a folding table that doubled as a desk. No skyline views, no luxury, just ambition and exhaustion. Emily remembered those years clearly. She remembered waking up before sunrise to revise pitch decks while Ryan slept on the couch, his laptop still open beside him. She remembered skipping family holidays because money was tight, telling herself it was temporary. She remembered celebrating their first investor with cheap wine in plastic cups, believing struggle meant love. When Ryan's company began to grow, Emily stepped back without being asked. Someone had to hold the personal life together. Someone had to make the sacrifices invisible. She became the quiet constant, the one who remembered birthdays, answered emails from assistants, smoothed over moods after bad meetings. She told herself this was partnership, but success has a way of changing what people notice. Ryan stopped asking for her opinion. Then he stopped listening. Then he stopped noticing when she stayed up late waiting for him to come home. The apartment grew bigger, but the distance between them grew faster. Emily didn't complain. She adapted. She watched him rehearse speeches in the mirror, adjusting his tie, practicing confidence. She watched the way his phone never left his hand, the way he smiled at messages that weren't meant for her, the way conversations turned into transactions. When Madison entered the picture, it wasn't with drama. It was subtle. A new name mentioned too often, a laugh that lingered too long, a presence Emily could feel without ever seeing. Emily tried once. She asked Ryan if he was still happy, not accusing, not emotional, just honest. He laughed softly, distracted, scrolling through his phone. "You're overthinking," he said. "Things change. That's life." That was the moment something in her closed. Emily realized she had become convenient, not cherished, supportive, not respected. A chapter Ryan believed he had already finished. The night she left, she wasn't running away. She was reclaiming something she had quietly lost. As the limousine pulled away from the curb, the city lights blurred past the tinted windows. Emily rested her head back, fingers clenched around the strap of her bag. Her chest felt tight, but her eyes were dry. Pain didn't always come with tears. Sometimes it came with clarity. She thought about all the times she had stayed silent to keep the peace, all the moments she had shrunk herself so Ryan could feel larger, all the ways she had mistaken endurance for love. The driver said nothing. The car moved smoothly through the streets, passing landmarks that had once felt like proof of arrival. Emily wasn't sure where she was going yet. She only knew where she wasn't going back to. And for the first time in years, that certainty felt stronger than fear. The gala was everything Emily expected and nothing she wanted to be part of. Crystal chandeliers hung above the ballroom, casting warm light over polished marble floors. Men in tailored suits laughed too loudly. Women in elegant dresses held champagne flutes like armor. This was Ryan's world now: money, optics, and carefully managed appearances. Emily hadn't planned to attend, but an old friend had insisted. One last favor, one last showing. Emily told herself it didn't matter. She told herself she was strong enough. She was wrong. She saw Ryan the moment she stepped inside. He stood near the center of the room, confident, relaxed, completely at ease. His arm rested lightly on Madison's back as if it had always belonged there. Madison leaned into him, laughing at something he said, her hand brushing his jacket with practiced familiarity. They looked perfect. That was the cruelest part. Emily froze just inside the entrance, the noise of the room dulling into a distant hum. For a brief, irrational moment, she wondered if anyone could see her heart breaking, if it showed on her face the way it felt in her chest. Ryan turned and saw her. The flicker in his eyes was quick. Surprise, calculation, relief, not guilt. He recovered fast. Emily watched as he leaned down and whispered something to Madison. Madison glanced over, her smile tightening just enough to be deliberate. She looked Emily up and down, then smiled wider, not threatened, amused. Ryan approached Emily with a practiced ease, as if this were a casual inconvenience. "Hey," he said, "didn't expect to see you here." Emily met his gaze. He looked the same. Expensive suit, confident posture, a man who believed he had already won. "I was invited," she replied simply. He nodded, then gestured lightly toward Madison. "You've met Madison, right?" Emily hadn't, but she nodded anyway. Madison extended her hand, nails immaculate, grip firm. "So nice to finally meet you," she said, her tone sweet, rehearsed. "Ryan's told me so much about you." Emily knew that wasn't true. What Ryan had told Madison was a version of Emily that made his choices easier. The quiet wife, the woman who didn't fit the future. Emily smiled politely and released her hand. "Well," Ryan said, glancing around the room, already distracted, "I should get back. Enjoy the night." And just like that, he turned away. No explanation, no apology, no acknowledgement of what he had destroyed. Emily stood there, alone, as the room seemed to close in around her. Conversations resumed, music swelled. People pretended nothing had happened. She felt smaller than she ever had before. This was the humiliation Ryan would never understand. Not the affair, not the betrayal, but being erased in public. Emily left early. No dramatic exit. No tears in the restroom. Just a quiet walk out into the cold night air, her chest aching with a pain she didn't know how to name. That night, she sat alone in the dark apartment, staring at the city lights, replaying the moment over and over. By morning, something inside her had shifted. She wouldn't beg. She wouldn't explain. She wouldn't compete. If Ryan wanted a future without her, she would give him exactly that. By morning, Emily Carter no longer existed in Ryan Blake's world. Her phone stayed off. Her email autoresponder was blank. No social media posts hinted at where she'd gone or why. To anyone looking, it was as if she had simply dissolved into the city she once called home. Ryan noticed the silence late that afternoon. At first, it irritated him. He told himself she was being dramatic, that she'd cool off and call like she always did. But when evening came and her name still didn't light up his screen, irritation turned into unease. He checked the apartment. Her clothes were gone. Not everything. Just enough. The closet looked untouched at a glance, but the absence was precise, intentional. The kind of absence that meant planning. Her laptop was missing, her passport, the small leather notebook she always kept in her bag. On the kitchen counter sat her wedding ring. Ryan stared at it longer than he wanted to admit. There was no note, no explanation, no demand. That scared him. He called her number. Straight to voicemail. He texted. Nothing delivered. He checked with mutual friends, assistants, even her sister. No one had heard from her. Emily had vanished without noise, without spectacle. Meanwhile, Madison noticed the shift immediately. Ryan was distracted, short-tempered, restless. He stopped laughing at her jokes, stopped checking his phone for validation. At night, he lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying moments he had dismissed too easily. Maybe she just needs space, Madison said once, lightly, testing. Ryan didn't respond. What neither of them understood was that Emily wasn't hiding. She was rebuilding. In a quiet hotel room far from Manhattan's noise, Emily sat by a window with a view of nothing remarkable. No skyline, no status. Just early morning light and the sound of traffic below. She drank black coffee and opened her laptop for the first time since leaving. Not to stalk Ryan, not to explain herself, but to take inventory of her life. She listed everything she'd given up, everything she had postponed, everything she had been told could wait. Then she made a second list, what she still had, her education, her clarity, her ability to start over without asking permission. The pain didn't disappear. It stayed with her, heavy and constant. But it no longer controlled her. It fueled her. Emily didn't announce her departure because she didn't want closure handed back to someone else. She wanted it to belong to her alone. Back in New York, Ryan's world began to crack in small ways. A contract stalled because a signature was missing. An old agreement surfaced with Emily's name still on it, a detail he had overlooked when he assumed she'd always be there. For the first time, Ryan felt something unfamiliar, loss without leverage. And somewhere beyond his reach, Emily Carter took her first uninterrupted breath in years, fully aware that disappearing wasn't an escape. It was the beginning. The limousine moved smoothly through the city, its interior quiet enough for Emily to hear her own breathing. She sat upright at first, unsure what to do with her hands, her thoughts still racing from everything she had just left behind. The leather seat was cool beneath her palms. The faint scent of clean linen and polished wood filled the space. Whoever owned this car valued control, privacy, and silence. Minutes passed before the glass partition slid down. The man inside wasn't what Emily expected. He was older, mid-40s maybe, with calm gray eyes and a presence that didn't push itself forward. No flashy jewelry, no unnecessary movement. He wore a simple dark suit, perfectly fitted, the kind worn by someone who didn't need to announce his wealth. "Ms. Carter," he said, his voice steady, I'm Alexander Reed. Emily turned slightly, cautious but composed. I didn't request a ride, she replied. I know, he said, but you needed one. That caught her attention. Alexander didn't explain right away. He looked out the window as the city passed, as if giving her space to decide whether she wanted to ask questions or sit in silence. Emily appreciated that more than she expected. You don't seem surprised, she said finally. I'm not, Alexander replied. I've seen this moment before. Not you exactly, but this kind of ending. Emily studied him. He wasn't looking at her with pity or curiosity or desire. He was observing her the way an investor studies potential, not to take, but to understand. How do you know who I am? She asked. Alexander smiled faintly. We met once, he said. 2 years ago, a charity fundraiser in Brooklyn. You were the only person in the room who asked about impact instead of optics. Emily remembered then. Barely. She had attended on Ryan's behalf. Alexander had been a quiet presence near the back, listening more than speaking. You were invisible to most people that night, he continued, but not to me. The car slowed at a red light. The city hummed outside, unaware that something irreversible had already happened inside this moving capsule. I'm not here to rescue you, Alexander said calmly, and I'm not offering charity. Emily felt something tighten in her chest, not fear, but relief. Good, she said. I don't need saving. Alexander nodded, as if that was the answer he'd been waiting for. I'm offering you space, he continued. Time, distance, and if you want it later, opportunity. Emily looked down at her hands. They were steady. What do you want in return? She asked. Alexander met her gaze. Nothing tonight, he said. Tonight you disappear. Tomorrow you decide who you want to be when you come back. The light turned green. The limousine moved forward. Emily leaned back, closing her eyes for just a moment. For the first time since the gala, since the apartment, since the realization that her life had been quietly dismantled, she felt something new. Not hope. Control. The place Alexander arranged for Emily was quiet by design. It wasn't luxury in the way Manhattan defined it. No skyline views, no doorman who knew names. Just a clean, modern apartment overlooking a tree-lined street where no one cared who she used to be. The kind of place where mornings arrived softly instead of with urgency. For the first few days, Emily did very little. She slept without alarms. She walked without destinations. She drank coffee slowly, letting it go cold if she felt like it. The silence felt unfamiliar at first, almost threatening. For years, her worth had been measured by usefulness. Now there was nothing demanding her attention. That was when the memories surfaced. Not just Ryan, not the betrayal, but the quieter losses. The ideas she never pursued because they were impractical. The opinions she swallowed to avoid conflict. The version of herself she had slowly edited down to fit someone else's ambition. One morning, Emily opened her laptop and didn't close it all day. She wasn't working yet, she was studying herself. She listed her skills honestly. Strategy, analysis, communication, pattern recognition, the things she had done for Ryan behind the scenes without credit, the things she had convinced herself didn't count because they didn't have her name attached. In the afternoon, she read, not novels, not distractions, books that forced her to confront uncomfortable truths about power, about boundaries, about how easily loyalty becomes leverage in the wrong hands. At night, she wrote, not messages she planned to send, pages no one would ever read. She wrote about resentment without judgment, about grief without shame, about anger she had never allowed herself to feel. Healing wasn't gentle, it was methodical. Some nights she cried without warning, the kind of quiet crying that came from exhaustion rather than heartbreak. Other nights she felt nothing at all, just clarity. Alexander checked in once, briefly, respectfully. Take your time, he said. Silence is useful. Emily appreciated that he didn't ask for progress reports. He didn't treat her recovery like an investment timeline. He understood that rebuilding something real took patience. Back in New York, Ryan's restlessness grew louder. The apartment felt wrong without Emily's routines anchoring it. Meetings felt heavier. Decisions took longer. He noticed details he had once ignored, how often Emily had smoothed over conflicts, how many relationships she had quietly maintained for him. He told himself it didn't matter, but the truth lingered. Emily wasn't gone because she was weak. She was gone because she had finally stopped waiting. Weeks passed. Emily's posture changed. Her voice steadied. The constant tightness in her chest loosened just enough for something else to take its place. Focus. She didn't know yet what her return would look like. She only knew one thing with certainty. When she stepped back into that world, it would be on her terms. And that knowledge felt stronger than any apology she would never receive. Emily's return to New York didn't make headlines. There were no announcements, no social media clues, no whispers planted in the right ears. That was intentional. Power didn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it walked in quietly and waited for the right moment to be seen. She landed on a gray morning, the city wrapped in low clouds that softened the skyline. The car that picked her up wasn't a limousine this time. It didn't need to be. She watched familiar streets pass by, noticing how little had changed and how much she had. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. Park Avenue, 32nd floor. Emily arrived early. She sat alone in the conference room, hands folded neatly on the table, breathing slow and steady. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city she once thought she had lost. Now it simply looked neutral. No longer intimidating, no longer defining. When Alexander Reed walked in, he didn't introduce her. He didn't have to. The men and women around the table noticed her immediately. Not because she demanded attention, but because she didn't seek it. She listened. She observed. She spoke only when it mattered. And when she did, the room shifted. Emily didn't pitch ideas like someone asking to be chosen. She spoke like someone who already understood the game. She identified risks others had missed. She connected patterns buried beneath surface optimism. She asked questions that made silence feel heavy. Alexander watched carefully. This wasn't the woman who had stepped into his limousine months earlier, carrying only a suitcase and unresolved grief. This was someone sharpened by restraint, by loss, by the discipline of not reacting too soon. By the end of the meeting, nothing dramatic happened. No applause, no declarations, just nods. Just notes taken quietly. Just doors that would open later. Afterward, Emily stood by the window alone, watching traffic pulse below like a living system. She felt no triumph, only readiness. Across the city, Ryan Blake walked into his own boardroom with practiced confidence, unaware that the ground beneath him was already shifting. His company was entering a critical phase: new funding, new partnerships, high stakes. He believed he was in control. What he didn't know was that names were being mentioned in rooms he wasn't invited into, that decisions were being shaped long before they reached his desk, and that one of those names, spoken calmly without emotion, was Emily Carter. Not as his wife, not as his past, but as someone no longer orbiting his world. Emily didn't plan revenge. She didn't need spectacle. She had learned something far more valuable during her disappearance. The most devastating return isn't fueled by anger. It's fueled by preparation. As she gathered her things and left the building, Emily felt the familiar pull of the city again, not as a test, but as terrain. This time she wasn't walking back in to be seen. She was walking in to move pieces. Ryan Blake didn't recognize Emily at first. She was seated near the end of the long conference table, posture relaxed, attention focused on the documents in front of her. Her hair was pulled back simply, no dramatic makeup, no statement jewelry. Nothing about her tried to be noticed. That was what made it unsettling. Ryan entered the room mid-conversation, nodding to familiar faces, already planning what he would say. His mind was on numbers, projections, control. He barely glanced around as he took his seat. Then Emily looked up. The moment lasted less than a second, but it landed like a physical blow. Ryan's breath caught before he could stop it. His confidence faltered just enough for the people closest to him to notice. Emily's eyes met his, not with shock, not with anger, not even with satisfaction, with recognition, not the kind that said, "I miss you," the kind that said, "I see you clearly now." Ryan felt something cold spread through his chest. This wasn't the Emily who had waited up late for him. This wasn't the woman who had softened her words to protect his ego. This Emily didn't adjust herself around him at all. She didn't smile. She didn't look away. She didn't acknowledge their history. She simply returned her attention to the meeting. As the discussion continued, Ryan struggled to focus. He heard Emily speak, measured, precise, quietly confident. She pointed out flaws in projections he had approved without question. She asked for clarification on assumptions no one had challenged before. The room listened. Ryan realized with growing unease that they weren't listening because she was connected to him. They were listening because she was right. Every time someone nodded in agreement, it felt like another piece of the past snapping into place. All the late nights, the instincts he had relied on without understanding where they came from, the calm voice that had once guided his decisions when he was too overwhelmed to think straight. He had mistaken her silence for lack of value. That mistake was now sitting across from him, undeniable. During a brief pause, Ryan cleared his throat, intending to regain control, to reassert familiarity. But before he could speak, Alexander Reed leaned forward and addressed Emily directly, asking for her assessment. Ryan wasn't included. Emily answered without hesitation. Her voice didn't shake. Her words weren't sharp. They were factual, forward-looking, detached from anything personal. Ryan watched her hands as she spoke, steady, confident, no sign of the woman he had left behind. For the first time, it occurred to him that Emily hadn't disappeared because she was broken. She had disappeared because she was done explaining herself. When the meeting ended, people gathered their things, conversations overlapping. Emily stood collecting her folder. Ryan remained seated, frozen between impulse and pride. She passed him without a glance. No confrontation, no closure offered, no need. And in that quiet, devastating absence, Ryan finally understood. He hadn't lost Emily the night she left. He had lost her long before, and this was simply the moment the world caught up. The shift didn't happen all at once. That was the part Ryan Blake didn't understand until it was too late. There was no dramatic announcement, no public fallout, no moment where someone stood up and declared him finished. Instead, things began to move quietly, efficiently, without him. Emails stopped coming as frequently. Meetings he once led were rescheduled without explanation. Decisions he assumed were routine started returning to him wrapped in legal language and polite resistance. At first, he blamed the market. Then he blamed his team. Only later did he realize the truth. The room had changed, and he was no longer at the center of it. Across the table, in different buildings and closed-door discussions, Emily Carter's presence grew. Not loudly, not aggressively, but undeniably. She didn't push Ryan out. She simply operated where he couldn't follow without exposing his own weaknesses. She understood the structure better than he ever had. Emily didn't need to argue. She referenced contracts he hadn't reread in years, clauses he'd signed when he was tired, distracted, trusting. She spoke in terms of long-term stability, while Ryan was still chasing momentum. People listened to her because she didn't need them to like her. That made her dangerous. Ryan tried once, only once, to speak to her privately. He waited outside a conference room after a late meeting, rehearsing what he would say. Something controlled, professional, maybe even kind. Emily stepped out, already mid-conversation with Alexander Reed. When she saw Ryan, she paused, not out of discomfort, but out of courtesy. "Yes?" she asked. Ryan opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing to say that didn't sound small. He nodded instead, stepping aside. Emily nodded back and walked away. That was it. No argument, no emotional reckoning, no victory speech. And somehow, that restraint hurt more than any confrontation could have. Over the next weeks, the pieces fell into place with mechanical precision. Ryan's role diminished. Authority he assumed was permanent turned out to be conditional. By the time the final decision reached him, it was framed as a strategic adjustment. No blame, no drama, just consequence. Madison left shortly after. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She simply recognized a sinking ship when she saw one. The future she'd imagined no longer included him, and she moved on with the same efficiency she'd once admired in him. Ryan sat alone in the apartment that had once felt like proof of success. The city lights outside no longer inspired him. They only reminded him of how easily things slipped away when you stopped paying attention. Meanwhile, Emily didn't celebrate. She went home, made tea, and reviewed notes for the next day. The satisfaction she felt wasn't triumph. It was alignment. She hadn't sought justice. She had simply stopped standing in the way of truth. And sometimes, that was enough to change everything. Emily Carter walked out of the building just as the sun dipped between the towers, casting long shadows across Fifth Avenue. The city moved the way it always had, taxis rushing past, people checking their phones, lives colliding without noticing one another. Nothing marked this moment as extraordinary, and yet, for her, everything had changed. She paused on the sidewalk, breathing in the cool evening air. There was no one waiting for her this time. No driver opening a door, no destination planned down to the minute. The quiet felt earned. Months earlier, she had stepped into a limousine because she had nowhere left to stand. That night, she had been running on instinct, survival, the raw need to escape a life that had stopped seeing her. Now, she stood still by choice. Emily thought about the woman she had been at the beginning of it all, the one who believed love meant endurance, who believed being needed was the same as being valued, who mistook silence for strength and loyalty for safety. She no longer blamed that woman. She understood her. Growth hadn't come from anger or revenge. It had come from paying attention, from recognizing patterns she once ignored, from learning that walking away wasn't failure. It was discernment. Her phone buzzed in her hand. A short message from Alexander Reed. "Proud of the way you handled today." Emily smiled softly and slipped the phone back into her coat pocket. She didn't need affirmation, but she appreciated respect. There was a difference now, and she knew it. She began walking, blending into the crowd, just another person moving through the city. No one looked twice. No one knew what she had lost or what she had rebuilt. That anonymity felt like freedom. Somewhere across town, Ryan Blake sat alone, staring at a version of the future that no longer included the woman he once took for granted. Emily didn't think about him with bitterness. He was simply part of a past she had outgrown. The story didn't end with her winning. It ended with her choosing herself. Emily reached the corner and waited for the light to change. As she stood there, she felt something settle inside her, a quiet certainty that didn't need validation. She hadn't left to be rescued. She hadn't left to prove a point. She hadn't left to punish anyone. She had left because staying would have meant disappearing. The light turned green. Emily stepped forward, merging into the flow of the city, carrying with her a future that belonged entirely to her. And for the first time, that was enough. So, the story has come to an end. And if you're still here with us right now, truly still here until this moment, then something in this story must have touched your heart in a quiet but real way. Maybe you saw a piece of yourself in Emily. Maybe you remembered a time when you stayed too long, explained too much, or shrank yourself just to keep something from falling apart. The lesson here isn't about luxury, betrayal, or winning. It's about dignity, about knowing when silence is strength. The Stoics believed this deeply. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Emily didn't change the world around her by force. She changed her response, and that changed everything. Another Stoic truth reminds us, don't explain your philosophy, embody it. Healing doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like walking away without a word, rebuilding quietly, and choosing yourself without asking for permission. If this story resonated with you, if it made you pause and reflect on your own life, then let that be a sign. You're not weak for feeling deeply, you're human. Please like this video, share it with someone who might need it tonight, and subscribe to the channel. We're here to tell stories that heal, one quiet truth at a time.